Hi, you're back with Dr. Kelly Pearson, and I'm here today to begin the four-part series about the skinny about fat. This actually has better news than the last module about sugar management. I think you'll enjoy it in terms of making life easier instead of more difficult. To begin with, let's look at the history a bit. Back in the 70s, there was a Senator McGovern who was involved in a committee on nutrition taking a look at the problems around food consumption in the nation. And as a result of looking at what we call epidemiologic studies, they were looking at populations that were were eating particular foods, trying to make an inference about what foods produce better outcomes. They came to the conclusion that increased fat, particularly saturated fat, which we'll talk about, caused our bodies to become fat and also made us more prone to heart disease and stroke. And so as a result, we came to the conclusion that we should really focus on a very high carbohydrate and low fat diet. Hence the big movement towards the low fat diet movement. And we have to ask this question, how has that really been working for us? Well, I would tend to say most of us would agree it's not been working as our country's become much larger, if you will, in terms of the obesity ratio. The market consequence of this proclamation was devastating, as well as many of the food companies could not cook and bake with oils, as saturated fats are solid at room temperature. Hence, the whole process of hydrogenation occurred, where they actually took oils and in an artificial manner added hydrogen, causing them to be room at room temperature solids, which would much easier to bake with. Without them, the frosting on the cupcakes would slip off and that type of thing. But we found out when we were hydrogenating fats, what has become known as trans fats, in fact, that was really causing a lot of heart disease and changing the angriness, if you will, of the low density lipoproteins, causing more arterial disease. And so those have been essentially banned in the market. But much like in all of history, we've made some mistakes, and we've had to do that in order to learn next steps. And I think the arrogance of the 70s and 80s, those researchers that were holding those premises to be true, has decreased, and we're starting to recognize that fat actually is necessary and good for us. And really, a high carbohydrate diet has been leading to obesity. What exactly is a fat? I'm going to take some of the mystery out of this because we talk about names of things and it gets a bit confusing, so we tend to ignore the topic. But a fat is basically a combination of carbons and hydrogens, and every carbon has an opportunity to reach out and handhold to four other molecules. It has four bonds. And you'll see in a saturated fat, or otherwise known as a fatty acid, every carbon is as saturated as it can with hydrogens. It has to connect with two neighbors, two carbons typically, if it's in the middle of this long chain. But if there is no more room in the end for another hydrogen, that's referred to as a saturated fat. On the other hand, if you see a fat, and that's in the second example here, that has double carbons, double bonds to carbons, there will be fewer hydrogens associated with the carbon, and that's called an unsaturated fatty acid. And the difference is that will be oil, an oil form at room temperature, not a solid. We talk about triglycerides. We get those in our lab work as well as when we look at our cholesterol. But essentially, it's a triglyceride is really the way that we hold and store fat in our body. It's a glycerol plus three fatty acids, whether they're hydrogenated or fully saturated or unsaturated. That is essentially a triglyceride. Now, with regard to the kinds of fats, I went through this brief introduction so you can recognize that in the world there are monounsaturated, there's polyunsaturated, and saturated fats. And I think you have an idea of what we mean by that at this point. And what you have to recognize, we're going to get into the particular functions of these different kinds of fats in the next module, but monounsaturated fats really stand up to heat well. And here's some examples: avocado and olive oil and macadamia nuts and sunflower oil. And you'll find that many of these oils, if you will, are both mono and have a component of polyunsaturated, etc. Many oils have multiple formations. If you take a look at polyunsaturated omega-3s, we see the fish oils and the walnuts and of course omega-3 infused eggs. Polyunsaturated omega-6s are more from the soybeans, and olive oil has a little bit of omega-6 in there. Canola oil, corn oil, and walnuts, again, are included in this category, as well as almonds and pecans. And then the saturated fats, you know, to be those things that are solid at room temperature, is butter, coconut oil, palm oil, meats with fat in it, and eggs as well. So on the next module, we're going to be talking about a little bit more detail around these different types of fats and why they not only can lead to pain, but how they can also, in proper quantities, reduce pain. So hold on and stay tuned for session 2 of this 4-part series around fats. Thank you.